What if a ghost could walk out of a mass grave and into the modern world? What if a scream escaped the silence of history, taking on flesh and bone? In the aftermath of one of the 20th century's most brutal political executions, a legend was born that a single child survived the massacre. For decades, a mysterious woman claimed to be that survivor, forcing the world to ask an impossible question: can the dead return? Our story begins in a blood-soaked cellar in Yekaterinburg, Russia, in the dead of night on July 17, 1918. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, and their loyal servants were brutally executed by Bolshevik revolutionaries. The bodies were disposed of in secret, their location unknown for decades. But the secrecy of their end gave birth to a powerful myth, the myth of the lost princess, Anastasia. 2 years later, and 1,000 miles away, in the desperate, chaotic world of 1920s Berlin, a young woman is pulled from the frigid waters of the Landwehr Canal. She is a ghost with no name, carrying no identification, her body covered in strange scars. She is taken to an asylum, where she remains silent, her eyes holding a terror that no one can decipher. She is registered simply as Fraeline Unbekannt, Miss Unknown. For months, she refuses to speak, her aristocratic bearing and cultured mannerisms a stark contrast to her ragged state. Then another patient at the asylum, a woman named Clara Puthert, catches a glimpse of her. Puthert, an avid reader of royal news, is struck by an incredible thought. She declares that the unknown woman is none other than a Grand Duchess of Russia, one of the Tsar's daughters. The rumor begins to spread through the community of Russian immigrants living in Berlin, a community desperate for a symbol of hope, a relic of the world they had lost. One of the first to visit is Captain Nicholas von Schwabe, a former personal guard of the Dowager Empress. He shows the woman photographs of the imperial family. She shows little reaction until she sees a picture of Anastasia and begins to weep. Soon she begins to speak, her memory seemingly returning in fractured, traumatic pieces. She claims to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia. She recounts a harrowing tale of the execution, of waking up among the bodies of her family, and of being rescued by a sympathetic soldier who helped her escape to the West. The story is both horrific and intoxicatingly romantic. The woman, who would eventually take the name Anna Anderson, possessed an uncanny resemblance to the lost princess in certain photographs. More compellingly, she seemed to know intimate details of life inside the Alexander Palace, the secret nicknames, the private jokes, the layout of the rooms. To her supporters, this was undeniable proof. How could a simple woman know such things? A powerful network of believers began to form around her. Gleb Botkin, the son of the imperial family's physician who was murdered alongside them, became her fiercest champion. He had played with the real Anastasia as a child and became utterly convinced that Anna was his long-lost friend. His unwavering support lent her an enormous amount of credibility within the exile community. However, the surviving members of the Romanov family were deeply, profoundly skeptical. The Dowager Empress, Anastasia's grandmother, refused to even meet with her. Others, like the Grand Duke of Hesse, Alexandra's brother, were determined to expose her as a fraud. He saw her not as a beloved niece returned from the grave, but as an imposter trying to claim a name and a fortune. The Grand Duke hired a private investigator to dig into the woman's past. The investigation led them away from the palaces of St. Petersburg and to the grim reality of a Polish factory. The investigator uncovered the story of a missing worker named Franziska Schanzkowska, a woman with a history of mental illness who had been badly injured in a factory explosion. The Schanzkowska theory provided an alternative narrative. Franziska had a history of depression and had disappeared around the same time Anna Anderson appeared in Berlin. Could the scars on Anna's body be from a factory accident, not a Bolshevik bayonet? Could her trauma be the result of a difficult life and mental breakdown, not a royal massacre? The battle lines were drawn. On one side were the believers, who saw a traumatized royal survivor, her memory shattered by the horror she had witnessed. On the other side were the skeptics, who saw a cunning, mentally unstable Polish peasant with a remarkable talent for mimicry. The world was forced to choose which story to believe. Anna's body itself became a battleground of evidence. She had a peculiar foot deformity, hallux valgus, which doctors confirmed was identical to a condition the real Anastasia was known to have. Her supporters pointed to this as irrefutable proof. Her detractors argued it was a common condition and merely a coincidence. She submitted to numerous examinations. Her handwriting was compared to Anastasia's, with experts on both sides reaching opposite conclusions. Her ear, a feature often used for identification, was deemed a near-perfect match by some, and completely different by others. Every piece of evidence was a paradox, a mirror that reflected the biases of the observer. One of the most compelling tests involved her memory. When visited by former Romanov tutors and servants, she would sometimes display shocking flashes of recognition, recalling obscure details that only the real Anastasia could know. At other times, she would fail to recognize people she should have known intimately, a failure her supporters blamed on trauma. The most significant challenge was her inability to speak Russian, Anastasia's native language. She claimed the trauma of the execution had wiped it from her memory, a psychological block. For her enemies, this was the single most damning piece of evidence against her. How could a Russian princess forget the language of her childhood? The case eventually moved from the drawing rooms of European nobility to the courtrooms of Germany. For decades, Anna Anderson fought a legal battle to be officially recognized as Anastasia Romanov. A victory would not only restore her name, but would also give her a claim to any remaining Romanov fortune held in foreign banks. The legal proceedings were among the longest in German history, lasting from the 1930s until the 1970s. Dozens of witnesses testified, historical records were scrutinized, and experts argued over every detail. The court was ultimately unable to reach a final conclusion, ruling that her identity had been neither proven nor disproven. In the 1960s, she moved to the United States and married a wealthy history professor, Jack Manahan. She lived out her final decades in Charlottesville, Virginia, becoming an eccentric and reclusive local figure, known for her aristocratic airs and her house full of cats. To her neighbors, she was a curiosity. To the world, she remained an enigma. She held firm to her story until the very end, never once wavering in her claim. She died in 1984 and was cremated, her ashes buried in the graveyard of a castle in Germany. With her death, it seemed the mystery would be buried with her, destined to be an eternal debate between believers and skeptics. But in the late 20th century, a new kind of witness emerged, one that could not be swayed by emotion or charm. Science was about to enter the story. The first breakthrough came in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union. A shallow, unmarked grave was discovered in a forest outside Yekaterinburg. Inside the grave were the skeletal remains of 9 individuals. Forensic analysis and, crucially, DNA testing confirmed the world's long-held belief. These were the bodies of Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, 3 of their daughters, and their 4 servants. The myth of the execution was now a scientific fact. However, there was a startling anomaly in the grave. 2 of the Romanov children were missing, the young Tsarevich Alexei and one of the daughters, either Maria or Anastasia. This discovery sent a shockwave through the world. It breathed new life into the legend. Could Anna Anderson have been telling the truth all along? The final, definitive chapter of the investigation required a piece of Anna Anderson herself. Fortunately, a tissue sample had been preserved from a medical procedure she had undergone years earlier. Scientists were now able to perform a DNA test that would have been unimaginable during her lifetime. The test was twofold. First, her DNA was compared to that of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, a living relative of the Romanovs through his maternal grandmother. The result was unequivocal. There was no genetic match. Anna Anderson was not, and could not have been, a member of the Romanov family. The second test was to discover who she really was. The scientists obtained a blood sample from Karl Mocher, a grandnephew of the missing Polish factory worker, Franziska Schanzkowska. When they compared his DNA to the sample from Anna Anderson, the result was a perfect match. The science was undeniable. The woman who had captivated the world for over 60 years, the woman who had convinced so many that she was the lost princess, was in fact Franziska Schanzkowska of Poland. The mystery that had spanned continents and generations was finally, definitively solved. In 2007, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A second, smaller grave was discovered near the first one in Yekaterinburg. It contained the remains of the two missing children. DNA testing confirmed they were Tsarevich Alexei and the final Grand Duchess. The entire Romanov family was now accounted for. Anastasia had died with her family in the cellar. The aftermath of the discovery was a quiet scientific end to a loud, romantic legend. The story of Anna Anderson was no longer a mystery, but a case study in psychology and belief. The legal battles were over, the claims rendered void. The history books were rewritten with a final, conclusive sentence. But the legacy of her claim is far more complex than a simple fraud. For decades, she gave a face to the victims of a brutal regime. She became a living symbol of survival against impossible odds, a story that people desperately wanted to believe in a century marked by war and loss. Her story forces us to question the nature of identity itself. Did she know she was lying? Or did years of trauma and mental illness, combined with the overwhelming desire of her supporters, cause her to genuinely believe she was Anastasia? Did the world create her as much as she created herself? The tale of Anna Anderson reveals the incredible power of a compelling narrative. Her supporters were not fools. They were people who chose to believe in a miracle. They saw what they wanted to see, filtering every piece of evidence through the lens of their hope for a world where a princess could escape her fate. She was, in the end, perhaps two people at once. She was Franziska Schanzkowska, a tragic figure who suffered a difficult life of poverty and mental illness. And she was Anna Anderson, the vessel for a global myth, an actress who played the role of a lifetime until her final breath. And so, the mystery that remains is not who she was, but why she succeeded. In an age of deep fakes and digital imposters, her story serves as a chilling, timeless warning. It reminds us that the most convincing lies are not the ones we are told, but the ones we tell ourselves.